Stormfront didn't just storm into The Boys Season 2, she came in like a time bomb, wrapped in memes, girl boss energy, and centuries-old hate. On the surface, she was modern, sarcastic, and social media savvy, but underneath, she was a relic, a monster frozen in time. And once the truth came out, it wasn't just shocking, it reframed everything we thought we knew about Vought and the very origin of superheroes. So, she was born as Clara Reisinger in 1919 in Berlin, which means she's over a century old by the time we meet her in Season 2. She's 101 years old, but thanks to Compound We, she looks barely 30. In the late 1930s, she became the first successful test subject of Compound We, which was created by none other than her husband Frederick Vought, the Nazi scientist who later founded Vought International after being brought to America through Operation Paperclip. Technically, Stormfront is Patient Zero, the prototype, the original superhero. Every supe that came after her walks in the shadow of her legacy. And that legacy is rooted in white supremacy and fascism, carried from Hitler's Germany into the modern world under the slick branding of a pharmaceutical empire. Her abilities like flight, super strength, electricity manipulation, and a powerful regenerative healing factor not only made her deadly, they also halted her aging, allowing her to live through generations while maintaining the appearance of youth. But immortality came with a price. Despite her long life and powers, Stormfront couldn't pass her abilities to her daughter. Unlike Homelander, who was artificially created and became the only known supe capable of naturally fathering a child with powers, Stormfront's daughter was completely human. And tragically, she aged like any normal person. Stormfront chose not to give her daughter Compound We, perhaps out of fear, control, or the unpredictability of the early versions of the serum, and that decision haunted her. She watched the one person she might have loved grow old, weaken, and die, while she herself remained untouched by time. Before she was Stormfront, she operated as Liberty in the 1970s and was a brutal supe with a barely hidden racist agenda. When the truth about her crimes, including the brutal killing of a black man, began to surface, she went underground. But she didn't vanish, she evolved. For decades, Stormfront lived in the shadows, hiding her face, changing her name, discarding identities like old costumes. But while the world thought she was gone, she was working. She became Vaught's personal assassin, enforcer, and ghost, eliminating threats, tying up loose ends, and doing the company's dirtiest work. Her hands were soaked in blood long before she reappeared in the spotlight. One of her darkest operations was Sage Grove Wellness Center, a psychiatric hospital masquerading as a wellness facility. In reality, it was a testing ground for Compound Phi on mentally ill patients. Stormfront was one of the key operatives overseeing the project. The goal was clear: refine the formula so that it could be safely administered to adults and generate stable superpowers. But the process was a nightmare. Patients were kidnapped, locked away, and used as test subjects, and many of them suffered grotesque mutations, mental breakdowns, or violent deaths. Sage Grove wasn't just a lab, it was a weapon factory. On the surface, it looked like Vought was simply testing Compound V on adults to perfect its formula. But behind the curtain, Stormfront and Vought were manufacturing chaos. They were using the center to create supe terrorists by injecting unstable individuals with Compound V and releasing them into volatile regions around the world. You might wonder, why would they do that? But the answer is simple: because fear is leverage. The more unpredictable, destructive supes wreaked havoc globally, the more governments panicked. And when those countries started facing threats that no regular military could handle, who could they turn to other than Vought supes? It was a masterstroke of corporate manipulation. Create the problem, sell the solution. If Vought could flood the world with supe terrorists, they could finally push the US government to allow superheroes like the Seven into the military, which would generate billions in contracts, along with global presence and total control. She understood propaganda better than anyone. This is what made Stormfront truly terrifying. She didn't just believe in supremacist ideology, she used corporate systems, social platforms, science, and violence to engineer a world where that ideology could thrive again. Her hands weren't just dirty from the past, they were actively shaping the future. Stormfront wasn't alone in this horror. She worked with Lamplighter, whose job was to cremate failed subjects, human beings who either resisted the serum or became dangerous to control. Together, they burned bodies and covered the tracks, all in service of creating a new generation of supes, stronger, loyal, obedient, and genetically aligned with Stormfront's vision. Throughout it all, she watched from the shadows as Vaught's influence grew. She tracked Homelander's rise like a scientist observing her greatest experiment. A man born of compound we, raised without love, desperate for attention, powerful beyond measure, and most importantly, capable of naturally passing on his powers, which she found after seeing Ryan. To Stormfront, he was the final piece. She didn't just want him as a partner, she saw in him a messiah figure for her cause, someone who could help her breed the future she'd always envisioned. When she finally returned to the public eye in Season 2, it wasn't just a comeback, it was the culmination of a century of planning. And when she revealed her past to Homelander, she wasn't ashamed. She was proud, because in her eyes, the world was finally catching up to the future she'd been waiting for. But unfortunately for her, things didn't go well, and she got roasted by Homelander's son, and now when I think about it, her plan would have probably worked out if she continued to stay hidden and manipulated events from behind the scenes.